Star Trek originally aired on NBC in 1966 on Thursday nights.
The first adult space adventure blasts off Thursday, September 15th.
But as its ratings began to decline due to increased competition, NBC moved Star Trek to Friday nights at the same time for its second season.
Coming to Fridays this fall on NBC.
As ratings continued to decline and rumors began to spread that the show was going to be canceled, it was famously saved by a letter-writing campaign masterfully organized and managed by B. Jo Trimble and her husband John. The Trimbles collected the mailing lists from a science fiction book dealer and a sci-fi convention. Plus, B. Jo made her way into the Paramount mailroom where she found 40 unopened bags of Star Trek fan mail, which she copied the return addresses off of. All in all, the Trimbles ended up with the names and addresses of 20,000 fans, and asked each one,
"Send this to 10 of your friends. Don't cancel Star Trek." And it was enormously successful.
The Trimbles also asked everyone to mail in business-size envelopes since they knew the studio wouldn't take the chance of not opening them, thinking the letters were business-related. As a result, the studio had to hire extra secretarial help to open and answer the mail, costing them a small fortune considering the volume of letters sent in by fans. And if the letter-writing campaign wasn't enough, fans also constantly phoned in and picketed outside of NBC's East and West Coast headquarters. Stunned, NBC finally relented and begrudgingly renewed the show, if only to stop the letter-writing campaign. Unfortunately, they would give the show an even more undesirable time slot and push it to 10 p.m. on Fridays, which was known as the graveyard slot. And it was called that because people were either asleep or out with their friends instead of watching TV. Thus, it would be where shows would go to die, and Star Trek was no different, finally being canceled for good after its third season. However, what that final season did provide was enough episodes to permit the show's survival in syndication, where it would begin to air opposite evening news, becoming a surprise hit. Shortly after that, it would also start airing during late afternoons and early evenings to attract new, younger viewers. So the lesson here is that time slots are important, as it was through syndication that Star Trek found an even larger audience than it ever had during its initial 3-year run on NBC. The show became so popular that fans began to hold conventions, inviting members of the cast and crew to give talks, screening episodes, and trading merchandise. These enthusiastic fans, who would be noted for their extreme devotion to the show and encyclopedic knowledge of every episode, would come to be known as Trekkies.
By Grabthar's hammer, by the sons of Warvan, I shall avenge you.
And because Trekkies enjoyed rewatching each episode several times over, prices for syndicating Star Trek actually rose over time instead of falling like other syndicated reruns, leading the Associated Press to describe Star Trek as the show that won't die. It became such a cash cow that Paramount, who owned the rights to the show, would refer to it internally as the franchise and their crown jewel. And as Paramount began formulating plans to launch their own television network to compete with ABC, CBS, and NBC, who had bungled the airing of the original series, talk began of producing a new Star Trek series to anchor the new network. A 2-hour made-for-TV movie would lead the way at a cost of just over $3 million, which would have made it the most expensive television movie ever made at that point, to be followed by a brand new episode each week. The series would be a sequel to the original series, featuring the same crew embarking on a new 5-year mission. Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry was promised that it would be a first-class effort, with a budget to match. And with that, the first thing he would do would be to update and redesign the sets and the Enterprise itself. Prior to Phase 2, Paramount and Roddenberry were actually planning a Star Trek motion picture called Planet of the Titans, which was eventually scrapped in favor of moving forward with the Phase 2 TV show. But while they were planning that movie, concept designer Ralph McQuarrie, famous for his work on Star Wars, was hired to redesign the Enterprise for the big screen, which is where these radical designs came from that you can find all over the internet. So when the time came to have another go at updating the Enterprise for Phase 2, this time, Roddenberry, realizing that previous attempts to redesign the Enterprise had strayed too far from the look of the iconic vessel, asked Matt Jeffries, designer of the original ship, to come back and update it to reflect the refit that would be part of the series' backstory. And his approach, to quote Mr. Spock, was pretty logical and based on the principle that the ship's technology would be updated over time, but the general silhouette would always remain the same. Therefore, not seeing a need to change the saucer, he mainly focused on the nacelles and the struts that supported them, saying, "Part of the theory of the ship's design in the first place was that we didn't know what these powerful things work, or how devastating it would be if anything went awry. So that's why we kept them away from the crew. And that meant they could be easily changed if you had to replace one. And that's exactly what he did, changing them from tubes to thin, flat-sided modules and tapered their supports. He also added the distinctive photon torpedo port on the neck between the saucer and the engineering hull. Work began in earnest on the model of the refit Enterprise, but when the series was eventually canceled and plans changed to making the motion picture instead, it was determined that the model was too small and not detailed enough to meet big screen requirements, and that a new model had to be built from scratch. Jeffrey's design, however, would endure and form the basis of the new model and refitted Enterprise we get in the motion picture, albeit with a few minor changes.